Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. I rise to oppose the Taxation, Annual Rates, Employee Allowances and Remedial Matters Bill. Mr Speaker, I'm opposing this bill because this is a fossil fuel subsidy bill. Plain and simple. That's what this bill is about. It's an omnibus bill. Look, there's some parts in it we can support, like the clothing allowance, non-controversial changes such as that. There's some other parts of it we're concerned around, the factor provisions, where it's deeply surprising. It's quite novel to be agreeing in legislation to an international treaty system which is yet to be concluded its negotiations. I share the Labour Party's minority view around this, but we will be opposing this bill, and we're opposing this bill because of the $6 million in tax breaks for the oil industry. Mr Speaker, this is one of the wealthiest industries in the world and one of the last industries in the world we should be subsidising with New Zealand taxpayers' dollars, incentivising them with tax breaks. What this bill does is extend the previous Labour government's non-resident offshore oil rig and seismic vessel tax exemptions. Mr Speaker, our vision in the Green Party is for a clean energy economy, a clean energy economy which delivers greater jobs, greater profits, greater taxes, greater prosperity, and this is the recipe for a richer New Zealand. The recipe for New Zealand's economy isn't to entice the Anadarkos, the Petrobrasses, the Tag Oils, the oil industry from around the world down to our shores, risking our environment, risking the economy that depends on it. That's not a recipe for a rich New Zealand. It's not even a credible economic strategy. It's simply hoping that someone finds something down there and they don't leave too much of a mess as they get it out. It's symptomatic of the entire economic strategy of the national government, which is predicated on simply raw logs, milk powder, hoping for oil. What we saw in the budget, though Bill English wants to focus just on the fiscal surplus, what we did see was a surplus of poverty, that 30%, the 290,000 Kiwi kids growing up in poverty, a surplus of poverty, a surplus of inequality, but also a deficit of ideas, a deficit of innovation looking towards the future. A progressive government would look to the future, to the richer New Zealand that builds on our strengths, which is our current clean energy expertise, would take it forward. So we're not supporting tax breaks for the fossil fuel industry, the $6 million officials advised. Mr Speaker, because we listen to the scientists, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who recently have warned us in dire tones of the consequences of increased fossil fuel emissions going into the atmosphere. Scientists down in Antarctica have warned us of the potentially irreversible collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet. Mr Speaker, if these facts aren't going to persuade the government to stop paying fast and loose with taxpayer dollars to promote a dirty industry which warms our planet, which risks our livelihood and literally the lives of tens and hundreds of thousands of people around the world, you have to ask, what will? They should be listening to the International Energy Agency and UN head Christina Figueres, who urge governments like New Zealand to leave 2/3 of the fossil fuels in the ground. Now, Mr Speaker, obviously we're still an oil-dependent economy. We still need it to get around for our industrial activity. What we need to be doing is transitioning to a clean economy urgently. And what we know is these oil reserves that Minister Heatley was spending a lot of his time trying to uncover in New Zealand's waters were assets, or so-called assets, that we couldn't afford to burn. Because the scientists are saying we can't afford to burn 2/3 of them if we want a stable climate for our kids to grow up in. So, Mr Speaker, these are toxic assets. It's a carbon bubble that the Green Party would avoid, because we would focus on the clean energy opportunities for New Zealand. So, as well as the $6 million subsidies contained in this bill, soon to become an act, there's the $46 million in tax breaks to the oil industry, WWF, calculated last financial year. $46 million of taxpayers' money going to the oil industry to promote more oil drilling, to promote more fossil fuels. There's the $25 million in free seismic survey information, direct subsidies to this industry. Mr Speaker, you've got to question the motives of this government when they're subsidising the oil industry. There's handouts for Tiwai, laws for Anadarko. Mr Speaker, I'd rather be focusing on the real New Zealanders who are struggling with the high cost of living, the high cost of housing, the low wages compared to other developed countries. You know, we work some of the longest hours for some of the smallest wages and pay some of the highest cost of living in the world. There are real people in real houses and real families that need support. But sadly, this government seems to be more focused on the Anadarkos, the Petrobras's, the Tiwais. Mr. Speaker, it's time to focus on real New Zealanders. So this government will change the law under urgency. They'll spend tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars to promote oil drilling. What would the Green Party do? Well, the Green Party would promote a clean energy economy. We would get us to 100% electricity faster than the other parties would get to 90%. We would transition our oil industry. We're opposed to deep-sea oil drilling. Onshore oil drilling, which doesn't carry the same risk profile, we would transition away. It's a good thing because what we know from the data is there's 4 times more jobs in clean energy than fossil fuel. We would build a clean energy export economy. This is something that Investment New Zealand says could be a $150 billion export opportunity by the 2030s. We could, through the Green Investment Bank, which we've recently announced, empower Kiwi businesses to be exporting the technology, the expertise, the intellectual property, selling the world what it needs, selling the world what it wants. Because at the moment, when you subsidise the oil industry and you send those economic incentives, we're looking to last century's economy. An economy which the science now says can't go on and on forever. What we have seen globally is a tipping point. In 2011, according to Bloomberg, more net capital investment was invested in clean energy than all the fossil fuels and all the nuclear for electricity. The world's looking in one direction, but sadly the national government is looking in the other. We need to embrace the clean energy export economy. That's what New Zealanders want. It's more secure, more resilient. It's about energy freedom. It's about new jobs. But it's also about a richer New Zealand. PricewaterhouseCoopers estimate we have a $7 to $22 billion annual economic opportunity from clean energy. So we would promote it through government leadership, through an updated energy strategy. We would promote new businesses through the Green Investment Bank. We would have a strong and effective carbon price signal. We would update and modernise our laws for a climate reality world. We would work with the wind energy sector, the wave energy sector, the biofuel sector to support them with R&D. Mr. Speaker, this is the richer future for New Zealand. So my vision isn't a handful of mostly foreign people working on these oil rigs, risking our jobs, albeit with taxpayer subsidies and taxpayer-funded tax breaks to entice them down here. My vision for the future of New Zealanders is thousands of Kiwis installing insulation under people's roofs, as we know has a 4-to-1 benefit. My vision is installing insulation under roofs, solar panels on the top. It's exporting clean energy technology the world wants, it needs and is paying top dollar for. That's the recipe for a rich New Zealand, not subsidising the fossil fuel industry with more tax breaks, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora.
Simon O'Connor.
Very pleased to rise to speak to the Taxation Annual Rates Employment